Good evening, Grid Connections listeners. I'm really excited to be sharing this episode with you. I know this is an interview I've been kind of alluding to for the last couple episodes, but in today's, we speak with Chris Hazell. He's the CEO of Fellten Systems. We talk all about their technology, where the company started, and how their kits are really making it a lot easier for cars that are currently on the road to become electric. It's especially of interest to me because while my daily driver is a Tesla Model Y, I do love the 1987 Land Rover Defender 90 we have. The one thing I don't like and usually has caused the most headache is actually the combustion engine in it. So we talk about the kit and many of the other things that they're doing to really make these cars that are on the road be able to kind of come into the new generation of electrification. I also want to apologize because you might notice during this interview I had with Chris that I'm a little bit sinusy or more congested sounding than usual. And I was just getting over a cold. But either way, I really am so excited to share this with you. And I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
So I'm Chris Hazell. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Fellten, alongside Alex Darwood, who's our CTO, who manages all of our sort of future developments and design side of things. And we started in 2018, and we started in the stunt industry. So we started by actually building 3 high-performance stunt cars for a show in Macau, just outside China, at a casino, which was the first all-electric stunt show, basically. And we built these 3 high-performance vehicles. They're space frame chassis, Tesla batteries, Tesla running gear, and then the 2 of them had Nissan 350Z shells on. One of them had a Porsche 996 shell on top of it. And they basically used to go out twice a day doing drift demos within the casino, but inside a closed environment. So obviously the EV stuff was absolutely perfect for that, apart from obviously all the tire smoke. So it was, a little bit better for people's health. But when we started doing that, we quite quickly learned that there was a massive gap in the market, and no one was doing full systems or kits of any level at that point. As we had the bigger players in the game back then, which was the EV Wests of the world, which were fairly well known, but there was sort of no one else really around. They were the only port of contact. So we sort of took it upon ourselves alongside the stunt vehicle stuff, because we also did stuff for Warner Brothers and Disney and for other films, which obviously we can't openly put on our social media. So many people don't know that we've actually built probably maybe 10 or 12 different stunt vehicles for different films over the years. But alongside that, we were doing design and development of parts and systems for integration. But the stunt vehicles really helped with that because they allowed us to do a lot of rapid prototyping. We'd build vehicles, they'd go and run for 3 months, then they'd come apart. So we didn't have any legacy work going out on the road with end users. It just had stunt drivers using and abusing the product to find the weak point and what was going to break. So it really did help us sort of move forward quite quickly from a development point of view. And then we moved heavily towards the kit design and development, very much away from the conversion market. So enabling people to do conversions, and enabling the restoration shops and the sort of the custom shops around the world to actually do a conversion, because they're amazing at doing what they do best, which is full perfect restoration on specific vehicles that they specialize in, but they don't have the knowledge base on the electronics and the EV conversion side of things. So we basically took the approach that we're going to do what we do best, which is the EV conversion system, and let them do what they do best, rather than us trying to do conversions and never doing anything to their level. Because you can't, like, they've been doing it for 20, 30 years, a lot of these shops. So the finished product they're going to produce around a perfect vehicle model is going to be astonishing compared to us if we were an EV conversion shop trying to do that as well as the EV side of things. So that's sort of where we focus so far. And I know you've got a load of other questions, which will cover loads of other topics along the way.
No, this is great. And I think maybe it's just coincidental. It's funny because hearing your experience and having worked with others who have been kind of in the EV space, not necessarily conversions, but even building EVs that were kind of prototypes that then became actual OEM or productized cars. It is really interesting to hear how kind of making these cars for movies that are really usually like cranked to 11 or really put through their paces and kind of just beat the hell out of is actually almost kind of like maybe the modern motorsport of how in the 60s and 70s all these cars would be raced, and then through these optimizations they would be kind of find these new things. I just think it's really funny that I've kind of heard that from a few different people in the industry, and it does seem to be true that it really puts the cars through a pretty high intensity and kind of finding those weak points that break, and then you're able to really take your learnings and productize it really well. And I think that's um, I couldn't agree with you more about letting the people who have that kind of subject matter expertise in doing restorations do whether it's restorations in general, or obviously there's a lot of shops that'll do specific makes and models. And so having that and then this kind of productized conversion kit, I think really is going to start making this a much one, more approachable, but two, kind of a common practice. Just because even in my own research and kind of working with different people and looking at it over the years, it can be one, very intensive to do, but two, really expensive. And I think just being able to get to this greater scale and what your team is doing is really impressive, and it's going to be a huge impact. And I'm personally excited to use one of your team's kits to probably do our Defender here in the next year or so. So I think with that, I would kind of love to hear a little bit more about the business, because I know yours is kind of an interesting one, how between your original company and then Jaunt, and then you kind of came together. And so you do have kind of this global subject, I guess to use the term subject matter expertise around two different continents. But if you could kind of share that a little bit, I think that's a really interesting progression of your company I've seen over the years.
Yeah, so we're running a zero EV since 2018, and then when we wanted to start pushing globally as a company, we obviously had to do all our trademarking. And at that point, it became very difficult with the word zero and EV to get international trademarks. And there was other companies using the word zero and EV and stuff. So we sort of hit a point very quickly where we knew we weren't going to be able to go ahead with that brand name. So we then did a rebrand last year to Fellten. So basically, Zero V just became Fellten. All the business stayed the same underneath, staffing, everything. That was just a rebrand. But alongside that, we started talks with Jaunt to try and work out how do we bring in more sort of like-minded people into the company, because trying to find staff is really hard, and then trying to find people that actually are staff but also capable of running a company and growing a company are even more difficult. So what we found with Dave and Martine that own Jaunt, it was bringing them on board with us. It was a massive benefit because in the Australian market, it's going to grow very, very rapidly. And as much as currently they're building finished vehicles through Jaunt, there'll become a time when there's that transition between they can potentially stop doing Jaunt vehicles and other people start building vehicles and they can supply the kits out to them. It's not yet, but we're going to see that transition happen like we did see in the UK and stuff. And like the
Great.
Australian economy is crazy. So they've gone from, in the UK and the US, we had type 1 charging, I think you class it as in the US, and we call it just type 2 charging here, which is just AC charging only everywhere. And then CCS DC charging came in. Whereas in Australia, all the service stations, they're just putting in DC charging. They're not even putting AC charging in. It just doesn't exist. It's not a thing they're even thinking of putting in. So they just leapfrogged and gone, all the
Straight
other
to
companies
DC.
took ages to get to this point. Let's just straight to DC, which is great. But now we're like, oh, now we've got to put DC charging on everything, even if it wasn't
Right.
ever going to have DC charging. But it shows the progression that if you look at the way Australia's gone and then you compare it to maybe some other countries out there that aren't EV focused yet, and maybe more not necessarily, and potentially third world countries in the future, like years down the line, they're all going to suddenly leapfrog to this higher level from day one. They're never going to do the slow progression we did all the way through. They're just going to jump straight to DC fast charging and bi-directional, all this stuff from day one. So Jaunt and the Australian tie-up is sort of a really good sort of playground for us, I suppose, in one way, to
Yeah.
just see how a new market adapts to EVs at a rapid rate, basically. Because that's a really good way of us looking at other smaller countries and going, well, this country is going to do exactly the same thing, and so is this country, but they're all going to do it at their own time over the next sort of 10 years, shall we say. So we might build up a model that works to drop into each of those other countries as they start coming online from the EV point of view. So there's some really interesting other countries out there, especially things like Thailand, where they're not allowed to import classic cars. So you can't import used vehicles, therefore their classic car market could be massive because the
Right.
value of them just keep going up and up because you just can't import them. So there's certain countries out there that, as EV becomes more normal and standardized, we'll find new immersive markets coming online for the classic side of things as well as we go along. So yeah, the tie-up with Jaunt was mainly because it was allowed us to get into a new market, and we had great people in their team from day one that already were really passionate about the EV space, and brought some very, very sort of, I don't know, different diversity of skill set that we didn't have within Fellten through Dave and Martine from the commercial side of things, and then from the more creative side of things from Dave's point of view from his background, which we really needed within the company. He's been a massive help on our brand, like all the Fellten brand sort of thing. He's been so heavily involved in how are we doing the brands, how are we structuring it, how we make sure we actually follow brand guidelines to grow from that point of view. And then the next thing now is just looking to the US as our next big step, I suppose, of how do we enter the US market and grow into that. Because there's quite a few new players obviously popping up in the US now. But how do we take what we've learned in the UK, bring it into the US, but do it cost effectively in volume, and see if we can understand the US culture, because it's slightly different to the UK and Australia.
It's slightly different everywhere.
Yeah, I'm slowly getting my head around it now, though, and starting to see how we need to do it. It's just, obviously, I was at SEMA recently, and that's a big eye opener to how the US market is from the aftermarket point of view. But to be perfectly honest, this year was so different to previous years when I've been there. It was a completely different atmosphere. It was all the EV stuff was in the central hall, so it was front and center. And the conversations we had this year, the previous years, the people that were completely against it are all starting to come around now. They're all starting to sort of change their opinion on it. They're all starting to think, actually, we could have one of each. When they're not trying to get rid of V8s, they are trying to have both. Like they used to see us as the enemy that was trying to just wipe everything out, and now they've sort of gone, well, actually, maybe they're not. Maybe they just want to have best of both worlds. There's a place for both in the industry with synthetic fuels as well as with the EV stuff. So I'm hoping that both can sort of coexist alongside each other, and that the real sort of, I suppose, the real lovers of the ICE engines will sort of accept that they can get really high performance and stuff out of the EV stuff, and allow a new generation to come in, as well as still having their older stuff as well.
Right. And I do want to actually talk to you more about SEMA and your kind of experiences and the things you learned there. But I think to take a quick step back, for US listeners, or maybe outside of that, can you tell us a little bit more about what Fellten means and where the name comes from?
Yes, so Fellten is not pronounced Felton, and I'm not going to try and pronounce the exact way it's meant to be. So it's a Welsh word for sort of lightning / thunder. That's the translation, I suppose, but it's pronounced very differently to how we use it. So there's probably a lot of people in Wales that despise the fact we're using the name Fellten and we're not pronouncing it correctly. But it's a cool name and we quite like it. And it was very different and no one really used it. So we've taken a very different approach to, I suppose, the other companies in the market, because we've gone actually just take a completely irrelevant name in one way and build a brand from it. Whereas obviously all the other companies out there are doing something EV related in some way or another. So you understand what they are as a company. Whereas we've sort of gone the opposite and gone, let's do a completely different name that's people only know who we are if they understand and know our brand.
Which I think is a really, and I think the story behind it and the meaning to it is really cool. And it's just a unique sounding name. I love the name, but going back to SEMA, I'm not sure, I guess should have discussed this earlier, but how much you can share about what your plans are for this year going into the US market, or if it's still a little too early for that?
No, we're pretty open. There's not really much I keep close to my chest. So we basically partnered up with LegacyEV, which are sort of probably the biggest distribution for EV company in the US side, and they've got all the training courses and all that stuff that go alongside it. So we've been working quite close to the LegacyEV team for the last year on and off. But this year at SEMA, we actually did a live build on stage with the LegacyEV team. So we actually converted their hot rod to electric using our Zonic motor range and our universal battery pack over 4 days at SEMA. Now, admittedly, we probably could have done it in one day, but we sort of, it dragged it out a bit just to keep people interested. So that drove in as a V8, drove out as electric, and then also did the parade afterwards as electric. So that was really exciting to do, a bit different. It brought back the old sort of overhauling days sort of thing, being done like a live build at the show, which was quite cool to do. So we've now partnered with Legacy. Legacy are basically going to do our US distribution and support, because it's difficult from the UK, I think, to do that support with a time difference.
Right.
So plus there is, as I said, there is the slight cultural difference of what support the US customers need the UK customers. So Legacy are very good now at offering the training courses and then go, this is the documentation our US clients are expecting to get with your product. Whereas we may do that slightly differently. So they're going to be able to do that and hold stock and then the customer can come to them, tell them basically what they want, and they can choose the best system for that customer. It may not be a Fellten system in certain cases. It may be that they're going to run, I don't know, a hypercraft system or something like that instead, with modular battery packs rather than our complete universal pack. It depends on the customer's needs, and that's one of the things we've sort of done with Legacy is we know that they are not just pushing Fellten products. They're going to push the best products for those customers, but they're also going to give us a massive amount of feedback on what are they selling the most of, what's the trend in the industry, where is it going, where's the support needed, what new products are needed in the future that we can start developing over here. The other benefit is with us doing this is we don't have to set up a location in the US. We don't have to set
Right.
up manufacturing in the US, which obviously has a huge cost. The overheads in the US for manufacturing and labor and stuff are considerably higher than the UK at the moment. It may
Wow.
seem from the US looking into the UK, it may
Yeah,
seem the
yeah.
opposite, but actually from the UK looking into the US and understanding all the taxes and finding staff is hard in the US in certain areas depending on where you're based. That actually with the Chinese import tariffs as well into the US, it can make it quite expensive to bring Chinese products in. So what we do in the UK is we can bring in Chinese product from the China into the UK, but we can do all our remanufacturing in the UK, build those components into systems, into kits. At which point we're doing probably about 60% remanufacturing on product. So at that point, the origin changes to UK. So when it comes into the US, it's got a different tariff on it than the Chinese tariff. So you're already saving, say, a 20% import fee from
Which is
Chinese
wild.
goods
Yeah, and that
already.
I think that's a pretty underestimated impact for a lot of these conversions. When I've looked at it, or I was, and I think just to kind of go back to just we have been hoping to get the Legacy EV team on probably in a month or so. They were great, and I actually even personally took their EV training course in May, and we're not sponsored by them. But anyone interested in doing it, I can't recommend enough. It was I feel like I already know a lot about the space, but I still learned quite a bit, and it was a lot. I mean, it was kind of. I remember I was talking to their CEO, and I described it because I was probably the only kind of like average, maybe amateur guy there. There were people from Shelby America, from all sorts of different actually automotive companies. And I had told them, like, each year I try to learn something new. And I've done some of this to an extent and used to build and race electric cars in high school. But I kind of told my wife or off and think of it as like a adult summer school or a summer camp. And so I went down to Phoenix for a week and took the course, and it was so much fun and made a lot of great connections through it. So anyone that's on the fence, I highly recommend it. But I think that's great, and your approach to it makes so much sense because there have been other kind of groups out there in the US that you can buy parts from, but I think they've really mastered the kind of all in one. They have the parts, they have the education, they have the support, and really make it a lot easier and more comfortable to kind of go with them and use them as a uh, supplier and who you buy your product from. So I think that's great. And the way you guys are approaching, and I don't know, can you announce also when you're expecting to start bringing them into the US or have kind of a rough idea for that?
I mean, the Zonic motors are already in the US, so Legacy hold a stock of them already. So they've already got the Zonic motor range. And we're already building universal packs potentially to ship into the US. So we're just waiting for orders now, pretty much, as to when
Gotcha.
we start
Great.
shipping stuff across. So, I mean, the LegacyEV approach is very good. I mean, it's approach we did in the UK a couple of years ago with our City and Girls training courses, now our TEV courses to deliver that. But we were doing B2B only. We never did B2C because it was just too much hassle doing all the after sales support.
Yeah.
So Legacy are really happy to sell to everyone, which for us is great because we never looked at the B2C market. So they're happy to do the additional training needed and the additional support and additional paperwork enabled to enable that. The other thing I think people really need to understand is that there's a lot of stuff out there that says, oh, EVs are really easy. There's a lot less moving parts, a lot
Right.
simpler, which it is in one way, but the technical knowledge required to build a battery pack from scratch and then make the mistakes you learn along the way, then build another one or two. It's sort of, by the time you add all of that time up, and it's easier to work for someone like Legacy and buy a system that goes
For
together,
sure.
and all the software works, and you've got support of how to wire it. As much as it's great for someone if they can afford the time and the money to do a from scratch build, by the time you've done that from scratch build, at the end of it, you'll go, next time I am not doing this. I'm going to buy a pre-made kit because the amount of time that goes into it is vast. And the customers are the same. Like we found with some of the B2B customers we work with, it's like they say to their customer, the cost of the parts is this, or the cost of the kit is this. And so the cost of the kit, I don't know, is 20, 30,000 more. But then when they go, actually, it's going to take us this much in labor to build it from scratch or buy a kit. That labor is what we have very tied up into our kit and done all that work on to fine tune it and soak up all that labor time. So the B2B company is not, the business is not having to actually do, thousands of hours of design development and building a kit from scratch. They're going to build one of. It's very hard in the world of the conversion world to make good money from it if you're doing loads of different vehicles, because every vehicle is a fresh build, every vehicle is a fresh development, and you've got to look at reliability, long-term safety. Whereas with a kit that's been fully developed, and we're building say 50, 100 of a kit a year minimum, we've done all that and we've spent all that money because we can afford to, because we're building them in a batch. And you're never going to get that, I suppose, on a one-off. There's always going to be some level of compromise or a huge amount of additional labor. So there isn't any level of compromise, which makes it extremely expensive to do a one-off.
For sure. And I think probably the biggest thing people don't understand is there are elements in doing a conversion that are tedious, but they're not insurmountable. Building the battery from the cells to the modules, that is incredibly tedious, trying to get all of those different connections right. It's not as straightforward, I think, as a lot of people think. And especially if this is like your first time, if you're going to do a build yourself, I could not recommend doing a pre-built battery pack more. That'll save so much headache. Honestly, it makes it a lot safer too, because it really does minimize how much of the dangerous parts of the pack or the battery that you're going to be most exposed to. And I mean, yeah, there's going to be enough kind of headaches and work you have to do with kind of the low power 12-volt schematics and figuring that out, that taking it to the battery pack level just becomes infinitely more difficult. I remember when I was at the LegacyEV program, we were kind of doing a mock-up of building your own, and it took us like 2 hours just to do like a couple of them. And they're like, okay, now that's the first set, and now you've got 12 more to do. And even then, it just wasn't. It just, yeah, I couldn't recommend it.
And plus, you're hand crimping everything.
Exactly.
Whereas we do, everything here is automated made. So
exactly.
everything's auto crimped with stripping and crimp machines, stuff like that. So we know every crimp is perfect, and we're not going to get an issue. Whereas hand crimping, we used to do years ago, the biggest issue with most builds, it becomes a wiring harness, because you get one bad crimp or one bad connection, and you could be chasing it for ages trying to work out where is that bad connection, or it gets water ingress because it's a bad connection. So there's all these little bits that you don't see, I think, when you do your first build, and then you learn and go, oh, if I'd done it this way, I wouldn't be chasing that fault.
Exactly. And even a bad crimp on a low voltage system isn't good, but it's manageable. Once you start getting to the actual battery side, like the impact is so much larger of like just what looks like a good, you have to pretty much test it sometimes. That's the only way you can tell, because you eyeball it and you would have no idea that the resistance is as high as it is in that one specific one. And so I can't recommend what you guys are doing enough. I think it's great, and so good to be seeing this going at a larger scale. I guess maybe like hopping back a little bit to, I know we were kind of focused on the North America part, and we do have a lot of North American listeners, but we have quite a few in Europe. And I think it'd be great because I've been really impressed with what you guys are doing as well in the UK around education. And here in the US, and it's been really fun working with the LegacyEV people, but they've even said it is kind of the Wild West as far as the regulations and the specifics. I think they just announced at SEMA that there has now become more of an official certification and kind of recognition of that. Whereas I know in the UK, you guys already have a decent level of official certifications and requirements that conversions have to meet.
We sort of do. So we have the European regulations, which is the TUV, which is very, very strict. And then there's something called R100.1, which is to do with mainly battery box safety. So does it meet these safety? Is it in an enclosure? Has it got blow-off valves? Has it got high voltage disconnects? Has it got H-fill? Has it got like all these safety things in place? So that's R100.1, which is becoming more mandatory now in the UK, that every EV conversion has to have an R100.1 check, just to make sure the base level of safety is there. It's not mandatory yet. So what we've been doing as Fellten is we basically looked at the OEM standards and gone, we want to build everything to OEM standards and spec. And then we know no matter whatever happens, if anyone does ever have an accident, anything ever goes wrong, we've done everything we possibly could to meet OEM standards. We can't do any more than that. Whereas
Mm,
obviously, there's a lot of people, I suppose, globally, that they don't need to meet any standards. So they will
right.
cut corners. They'll do what they think is best because they've got nothing to follow. So at SEMA, we announced something called EVTech, which I'm actually on the board of EVTech. And the EVTech is there to help set these standards from an educational point of view to try and set, these are the standards that you have to learn in order to be EVTech qualified. And from a safety standards point of view. So there's two sides of it. So I'm heading up the safety side of EdTech, along with Chris, who's also my trainer in the UK, to try and go, these are the base standards we want to impose in the UK and across Europe, just around base safety, like that battery management systems must be used. And the battery managements need to be inside the battery pack, not outside the pack. And it needs to be
Right.
a sealed box that you can't get wet. It's just, there's a base level of safety, which is fairly easy to achieve, that probably makes a system 99% safer just from doing those base couple of things. And then the last 1% is the really hard bit to make it even safer. But we've been incredibly clever with the way we design our systems so that you can't run our systems without the safeties in place, or you have to actively do a bypass willingly. So like our CCS kit, for instance, you have to have HV isolation sensing. Otherwise, it does not operate. You have to run HVIL, which is HV isolation monitoring. So if you ever unplug something, it will open the contactors. So there's no
Mm,
HV on that plug you've just unplugged. So there's certain things that we've been trying to put in place which you cannot bypass, and therefore you have to do it a certain way. And what we found is, because we are one of the leaders in the market, if we do that, people naturally do it. Whereas if we allow people to have the option to do it wrong, they'll just always do it wrong. So
right.
we basically have been designing our products to say, actually, this isn't waterproof, therefore you must put it inside of a sealed battery pack. And you cannot bypass this. So if you want CCS charging, you have to run it. Otherwise, you just don't have CCS. So there's all these things we've been doing, which is, I suppose some people don't like us for doing it, but overall, we prefer to make sure the systems and the conversions on the market are safe, because it only takes one bad system
Oh
that
yeah.
has a massive problem and hurts someone for it to damage the entire market. So what we're trying to do is make the whole market safer, because it protects us as a company long term. Because it only takes one person that's built a bad conversion to electrocute themselves, and then suddenly the whole market's got a really bad name for itself, when actually it was just one person not following any standards. So we've been trying to impose standards that people can't bypass, shall we say,
Right.
within the systems that we sell and that we supply. And also, we've been tying that into our warranties as well, to say, like, if you want your warranty on your battery pack, for instance, because we will be starting to offer like a 3-year warranty on a battery pack. And it's like, well, the only way your warranty is maintained is you must do these downloads of data every quarter to log the data, and it must be wired in this way. Otherwise, your warranty is void. So that makes someone do it properly because they want warranty, because it helps them resell the product to their customer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the takeaways when I did the EV course was kind of tangential to that, not necessarily like someone trying to cut corners, but they had a couple of really good examples of conversions of people who are kind of coming from the traditional kind of resto mod or restoration business that were doing the electric car. And so like the wiring and a lot of these were done really well. But when you start thinking about like, okay, you have the battery pack, but then you also put your fuses and a lot of these kind of safety controls right behind it. So in the event of like a head-on collision, the battery's just going to go into that and just destroy those. And then you could have a fire very quickly. And so there's two elements, and I think what you and the LegacyEV team are doing exactly the right thing. It was great to see what was kind of announced and being done at SEMA too, to kind of help like, okay, there's two components. There's doing it right, or doing it safely and doing it in a very high efficient manner. But then also you do have to kind of just change your thinking of where you put these devices to even make ideally the car safer than when it was a combustion engine vehicle. So then when it does get an accident, there's an even better likelihood of either someone walking away or at least not it being a truly devastating accident.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of situations you don't know what you don't know. And I'm hoping the
Exactly.
training
Exactly.
courses like we've seen it in the past, and there's people that, because they don't know, they think they're doing things safely. And as you learn more knowledge, like I'll look back now at stuff I did 2018 and think, oh my God, I did that. Like, how did I make that? Like, why did I make that? But my knowledge base is very different now. So I think the training courses that are out there, even if they don't give you everything you need to know about EV conversion, at least they'll show you how not to
A
be
lot more,
dangerous
right? What not
and
to
what is
do,
dangerous. Yeah,
right?
what not to do. And that is just as important in a lot of situations. And you've said about crash safety. So on all of our packs, we do 20G crash simulations
Oh
to
wow,
make sure that the mounting points will take a 20G crash, which also, because everything's designed in CAD, we can do that. We can do a simulation in CAD to make sure that if it was in a crash scenario, and that's part of the Australian regulation. So in order to put an EV
interesting.
on the road in Australia, you have to prove to the engineer that yes, you can weld new brackets onto the chassis and you can make modifications, but you have to show that any modifications you've made will sustain a 20G crash.
Hmm.
So that's the way they've done it. So they've allowed you to make modifications, but you must be able to show simulations and that it would be safe in a 20G crash scenario. And that's also made us up our game on certain ones of our pack designs and how we've done it for the Australian market and gone, actually, we do need to add some extra brackets in here or some extra fitting points here, because when we did the crash simulation, it didn't quite meet 20G. So with us being so diverse across so many sort of countries, we're picking up different bits of regulation from different countries, which means we probably go a bit too extreme for some countries, but it means we've sort of condensed all of them together into sort of a standard that we follow, which makes us be able to meet Australian standards as well as UK and European standards, as well as potentially US standards, which don't exist yet, but we know whatever we produce here and we push into the US, normally above and beyond the standards that are in the US because they haven't yet been set.
I think I mean that's great, and I think just once that's it just goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's one more example of when you're building or doing a conversion for the first time. It's like, why overcomplicate this and puts? I mean, you might as well do it right and make the conversion of it a lot one safer, but also, in my opinion, more enjoyable. Just mitigating a lot of these other challenges that someone's already figured out for you. With kind of looking at the U.S. market, with everything your team did at SEMA, and I wish I'd been there this year. That was my honeymoon, so understandably I didn't make it, but I'm sure I'll be there. Maybe we'll do our anniversary in Vegas or something to go to it next year.
Why not?
Admittedly, Vegas is not my favorite place, but it was very entertaining to watch and see everything on kind of the social medias of what your team and everyone was doing at SEMA, especially around the EV announcements. And I think it is kind of interesting that EVs have been kind of a difficult one for, especially like you take like a Tesla Model 3, you can kind of modify it, but it's going to be more aesthetic generally, especially at SEMA, than like actually improving the car. But that is where you're starting to see this huge kind of uptick in interest around the restoration, the resto mod, where you can take a lot of older, beautiful cars, and so many great looking cars had just terrible powertrains. And this is kind of where you can take that and put a battery pack and motor in it and really turn the car from uh, something that had been kind of boring to not just a sleeper, but also just a really great driving and fun car for even around town or on the weekends. But I'd be curious to kind of hear, like, because this wasn't your first time. How many SEMA events had you been to before?
5, I think.
Oh wow, okay,
So I actually went to SEMA the first time before I started Zero EV slash Fellten. So the 2017 I went, and at that point I was doing Liberty wide body cars and like playing with
gotcha.
V8s and V10s and stuff. So I went then, and even when I went then, I was quite surprised there was literally no EVs there. I think there was 2 EVs. There was a Porsche 911 and some drag racer hidden up somewhere
Yeah,
out the
yeah,
way. And obviously COVID happened, so I sort of there was gaps when I didn't go because of the COVID thing. But it has changed drastically in the last couple of years since I've been going to SEMAs, and just how much more accepted it has become. And it's starting to take over a lot quicker, and a lot more of the builders are now starting to get involved with it and seeing it as the next thing. It's a lot of these custom shops have built V8s for days. And it's
right.
like, well, what do we do next? Oh, we've already done loads of twin turbos, and we've done this, and we've done that. Like, what's next? So to a lot of these custom shops, they're going, well, actually, they're not bored, but they're getting to a point where they want the next new thing. And the EV stuff suddenly opens up another revenue stream for them, and also something different. And it helps them bring in younger generation as well into the custom space. And I think that's what we find quite exciting, is that suddenly we've got a different demographic. Like when you walk around SEMA, SEMA is very much a very Pacific demographic that attends.
Yeah.
But what we're trying to work out now is, can we produce an EV movement for retrofitting of classics that bring in those younger generations? The ones that love the way a classic look, but would never own one because they've got no idea how to maintain it. They know how to look at an iPhone and play with their apps.
Right.
That's what they want to. They want to go on there and see what their car's doing. They don't know how to change the oil. They don't know how to do all that. So I think there's this new demographic that will come in that will sort of keep the aftermarket running from a classic point of view, but they will want electric classics. They'll want stuff that they know they can get in every day and drive it. And we've seen that with a lot of our customer base that we're supplying out to now. Is like, you'll do an electric Porsche that was only ever driven on the Sunday. Suddenly it becomes, I drive that car every single day as my daily driver, because suddenly I can get in it every morning. I know it's going to start. I know it's not dropped oil all over the floor. I know I've not got a £60,000 engine rebuild after a couple of years of driving it hard.
Right.
There's all these things,
Right.
and you suddenly realize that actually we were building EVs with some of the companies in the UK, and they were like, oh, we're building them and they'll just be weekend cars. And then it came very apparent pretty quickly that what we thought was going to be a weekend car for most people suddenly became their everyday driving car, because it was just so much easier to drive being EV, that they could actually appreciate it a lot more and use it all the time. So I think the approach now for the EV conversion will really allow us to have more classics on the road. And it will bring about a completely different market, I think, with a very, very different demographic moving forward to keep them alive. And I think you'll see a lot more of them, because right now it's a bit depressing that people have got all these beautiful classic cars globally, and yet most of the time you see them only on certain days of the year,
and maybe at a cars and coffee thing once a year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like, well, how do you get these cars being driven all the time again? And I think the EV is the route for that.
No, and I've been kind of impressed with that too. I think there is I like to think I know enough about kind of car maintenance, and I know for a lot of people it's a skill they just don't have, or for a kind of myriad of reasons. But what I have seen that I think is also kind of cool, kind of tangential to that, is like maybe their dad passed away or a husband passed away, and now the EV conversion thing does make it much more easier for them to, exactly like you're saying, keep a very beautiful but also a very expensive to maintain car on the road, and something that they can still kind of enjoy and have that connection to without the stress of, I mean, it can be a decent upfront payment, but once you have that, you don't have to, exactly like you're talking about with the Porsche engine rebuilds and many, many different kind of things that can sneak up on you.
It's also the asset side of things. It's like, go and
For
buy a
sure.
new EV and you lose
For
half the
sure.
value in a year, in the first 2-3 years, for instance. Yeah. Or you buy a
Yep.
classic, admittedly you spend more on it to convert it, but the base asset isn't depreciating in anything, it's appreciating in value. So there's a
Right.
different, I think it's to do with mindset. It's like, I prefer to go and buy, last year I think I drove my Porsche G body every day, day in, day out. Now that car has gone up in value since we bought it.
Yeah.
Whereas if we'd gone and bought a brand new Tesla, we'd probably lost the value in that 2-year time period.
Exactly.
And we haven't. If anything, the car we've done, because it's a non-intrusive conversion, the car value stayed the same. If anything, it's gone up. So it's just trying to work out the mindset. I think as we get more into kits, bolt-in kits that are quick and easy to fit, potentially we need to look at how we can offer sort of more finance packages on them, to go, you've got a classic, you can do a 5-year finance package on the kit that's in that vehicle. And then it's like someone buying a new car at that point. They just finance it over 5 years.
Right.
But they take a classic at the beginning, finance it over 5 years, and at the end of it, the valuation of the car is still where it was when you bought it or higher. So you haven't lost that money either, which is quite good.
Exactly. And I think you brought up a really good point with a lot of your kits, especially, and with what I think the kind of premier conversion companies are doing, where it's a bolt-in kit. It's not, I mean, there's been a lot of people who do the DIY ones, and it can get a little messy, needless to say. But I think what's really cool with a lot of these kits is it's designed to be either no penetrations or different than what the car already was, or very minimal if there are any. So you can actually, if you decide down the road, or you give it to someone and they want to make it back to a combustion engine, it's still a possibility. But I think that just makes it a very clean conversion and honestly safer in general too.
Yep.
With that, I know you're obviously really starting to scale up the universal battery pack, but you do have a few uh, brand and model specific kits. Can you talk a little bit more about those and kind of where you see those kind of fitting into uh, the different
Yes.
products you're offering?
So the universal pack wasn't actually a universal pack at the beginning. It was actually designed for our new Defender kit that comes out in Q2. And it just happened to be that we went, oh, this actually fits all these other vehicles. It was not planned. It just worked. But what it allowed us to do then is go, actually, we can start producing this battery pack in volume before it starts going into the Land Rover Defender. So we can start bringing in some cash flow basically on
Right.
something we'd already designed. Instead of leaving it sat on the shelf for another 8 months before we then started building the kit, we could start building that and pushing it through. So we started with the Porsche 911. So we have the Porsche 964, and end of Q1 we start building the Porsche G-body kits as well. So they're a 62 kilowatt hour battery pack, Tesla large drive unit. Now they're the only system we actually still run sort of recycled components in. So we do a full refurbishment on a large drive unit, mainly because to get that performance in a brand new motor makes the kit way too expensive. It's expensive anyway, but it adds like another £20,000 to the kit cost because
Right.
the high end motor kit systems are just very expensive. But that's also got CCS rapid charging for CCS1 or CCS2, depending on where you're based, and also AC and heating, gear selection, gauges, like every single bit you need to convert that Porsche comes in that kit, even all the coolant lines and everything. So it's probably a 1 week install on the Porsches because they're quite technical. But it maintains the original balance of the vehicle. It is about 80 kilos heavier overall, so it's about a person heavier. But the power delivery and what you get from it is above and beyond
Right.
where it originally was. It's you're at Porsche turbo territory or from the power delivery and stuff, which is really really good. And I said the G body one is coming out Q1, so we're starting to build them in Q1 and start rolling those out,
Very cool.
which will open up the market a bit more because the G bodies are sort of more common, I think,
Yeah.
across the US and stuff, and same in the UK. So the one we've got here is a G body. We've got a 964, but the G body is the one that we've done a lot more miles in. And then we also have the mini kit. So we actually developed that alongside BMW. So we did it as a marketing thing for BMW. We built 5 of them, 3 prototypes,
Oh, cool.
and we built one for Paul Smith and one for McQuaina. And they went out sort of with the new electric mini offering. So it was like go to a show and you've got classic electric and you've got the new mini offering. And we've then continued building those kits basically, which there's a couple of companies now offer those kits. I think there's Vintage Underground in the US that offer them and 1 or 2 others. The names escape me. And in the UK, we have a company called Recharge Heritage, which we actually
Yeah.
own a small amount of, but
Oh,
that
cool.
holds a 5-year contract with BMW to use the BMW wings on the Classic Mini. So when you buy a car there, it actually comes with the BMW branding on it because we're allowed to put that branding on those vehicles, which is a really good deal we managed to sort of do with BMW, which was good. So that kit is at such a high level now that, BMW were happy for us to put their branding on the product, which
That's
was a
huge.
really good thing.
Yeah.
And then alongside that, we've now have the Land Rover kit. So we did develop a Land Rover kit. We sort of stopped, then we did a redevelopment, mainly because we wanted to do it justice. And when we produce the kit and release it into the wild, well, we could have produced a Land Rover kit a couple of years ago, and we could have used Tesla motors and batteries and stuff. But we sort of hit a point where actually, if we're going to do this, we want to do it all brand new product, large scale repeatability, because it will move into places like the mining industry and other places. So we decided actually we want to go all out on our kit and build the best we possibly can. And then when we productionize it, the pricing point will come down because we'll be building volume of them. So our new Defender offering, which I'll just do a plug now because we're about to start. We're happy to start taking orders for them
No, I mean,
as of
I'm
now.
foaming at the mouth for one. I
um,
can't wait to do it.
and they'll be getting built as of Q2, so we'll start building them then. And the kit's starting to look really good. So it's the universal 55 kilowatt hour pack in the front. But we've then designed a bespoke seat box. You actually take out your old Defender seat box and you drop in a new seat box. And that contains another 55 kilowatt hours of battery
Oh, wow,
in the
cool.
seat. So you've got 110 kilowatt hours. You can have just 55, but in most situations, 110 is great because that's that sweet spot. That's at 200 miles range plus, which where everyone
What
wants to be. A Defender
just out of
is a brick though.
curiosity,
It's like the worst vehicle.
at 55, have you tested, is that usually around just like 100 miles range or what?
That's a 100 mile-ish range,
Yeah,
yeah. It all on the Defender. It all depends how fast you're going. As soon as you
for
go over
sure.
that, like 45 miles an hour, that's when the
Yeah.
aerodynamics really come into play, and it just
I don't know if
destroys
you
the
can say
battery.
aerodynamics with a Defender. It's just
This is
reality
what this
comes
is.
in.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're trying to do what we can to make it as efficient as possible. So we've also got to try and
Cool.
guide our customers, say, look, please don't put a snorkel on it. It's an EV. You know, run sensible tires.
Right.
Like there's all these things of like which have a massive impact on range. You know, if someone fits air ride, in one way it's good because they can run it lower at speed to just lower that air gap underneath the vehicle. So there's benefits that can be had.
That's
One
interesting.
really important thing we are doing on the Defender to try and so we're doing everything now on the EV side to make it as efficient as possible. Which in the past on the other cars we weren't too worried because it's like it's a Porsche, or it's a Mini, it's small, it's light-ish, we'll still get good range. Defender, that's obviously not the case. Like we went and stuck 110 kilowatt hours in a Mini, we get like 400 miles of range or something still like that, as long as the weight
There'd be
wasn't too hard.
sparks as you're kind of just hitting the ground everywhere. But
You think the Mini does 110 miles on a 19 kilowatt hour battery pack,
wow.
and the Defender does
And is
100 miles on
the
a 55 kilowatt hour battery pack. So you can clearly see the difference here between the vehicles is just absolutely crazy.
And now what is the is it 19 kilowatt hours is the size of the Mini Cooper conversion kit, or is it a larger battery than that?
Gotcha. No, so it's a 19 kilowatt hour because we wanted to keep the weight exactly the same. So the car is the same weight as it was for factory. It's actually 5 kilos lighter. And that was the important thing with the Mini is we wanted to make sure it still drove and felt like a Mini. Now the engine was never the special part of the Mini. It was how it drove and how it felt that was what made a Mini a Mini. So we had to keep the weight the same and the weight distribution the same. Otherwise, you'd have just lost all the character. You need to get like the Porsche. We kept the same weight distribution, which some people don't like, and other companies will do 50-50 weight distribution on Porsches, which I get. Probably makes the vehicle drive even better. But for the Porsche enthusiasts, they wanted it to still feel like a Porsche.
Right.
So it was like, right, you're taking away this flat six engine, which does sound beautiful. We don't also want to change the driving characteristics as well. We kept some of that character in there, which has pros and cons. With the Defender, we've gone to the extreme now when it comes to the motor solution. So we've actually just finished developing a dual torque vectoring gearbox. Now, some people understand what that is, some people won't. So basically, we have two motors, and then we have a central gearbox. But the central gearbox is actually two gearboxes in one, so it's not got a differential in the middle. So it means each motor runs through its gearbox, and it can control each prop shaft separately. So your front and rear prop shafts are in theory
just
controlled with separate motors.
Essentially,
yes,
yeah.
Essentially, so we've been developing that now, and we've just ordered all the first prototypes. So sort of January, February time, we get first prototypes of those, which will allow us to basically on the Defender have a very powerful system. So we're going to run the Zonic motors. So we can either have two Zonic 70s, we can have a 70 at the front and a 180 at the rear, or we can run two Zonic 180s. So we can have 360 kilowatts of power at something like 720 newton meters of torque at the motors. So we're at the thousands of newton meters of torque when it gets to the wheels. So it would be pretty quick. But the big benefit here is we can work on efficiency.
Sorry, are you building how much regen can you get out of these things? Because that's the other issue with the Defender.
Crazy.
You got it getting up to a speed. You want it to really brake hard.
I mean, it will stop well because we've got independent motors. We can basically put in a lot of situations, you either have a motor in the rear or a motor in the front, or you have a central motor that shares. But because we're independent motors, we can do more regen braking on the front via the rear, so we can get the braking balance correct, which is really good. But we can also do a level of traction control based on wheel speed sensors, so we can make sure also we don't lock the wheels up on regen and things like that. So there's a level of traction control we can implement. I keep saying, we've done.
If you need a US tester, I am in. That is so sweet. That is absurd.
So
that is so cool.
I play the game on the torque vectoring. It should help efficiency because we should be able to, in theory, when you're doing motorway speeds, shut down the rear motor and just run the front motor, so we can keep motors in efficiency bands. Which I was going to say,
are they going to be geared differently?
They're not geared differently, no. But we've been looking at how Tesla have done it because in a lot of situations, if we can talk a customer into having a Zonic 70 and a Zonic 180, so have a 70 in the front, 180 in the back, that's where we think we're going to get our peak efficiency because we can run on 70 at certain times, 180 at other times based on its efficiency range. Unfortunately, in the US market, most people just want as much power as they can possibly get. So in a lot of situations, they're not doing it for efficiency. They want two 180s. Ideally, I would prefer to do every vehicle with a 70 and a 180 because they both have different peak efficiencies at different RPMs. So then
you're still going to have a great amount of power.
Yes, you still have a huge amount of power, but it's a hard sell. theoretically, also with the torque vectoring, it's performance as well. Like when you
Yeah.
do first pull away, we can put more power to the rear motor, less to the front. And then as you go through your 0 to 60 run, we can transition the power between front and rear based on grip and weight distribution change and all that sort of stuff. So there's some really clever stuff we can do there. So we've got a lot of work to do on the torque vectoring side of things, but it'll be more of a, here's a system, it works, it's great. And then over the next year or so, we'll do more testing. And then there'll be software updates going along where you'll be like a Tesla, you can do a software update and suddenly get more range or suddenly get more power. The chances are that's what will happen with our Defender kit is the first kits will go out and then a year later it'll be like, would you like to do a software update? And we'll update the VCU to a new software basically file that will allow it to then have higher performance and higher range or something based on the data we've gathered over a year period of doing testing. So there's a lot of really cool stuff we can do with that. The other thing we are doing on the Defender, which a lot of companies aren't doing, is we're doing AC cooling for the battery pack and motor.
Cool.
So we basically
Very cool.
looked at how Tesla Model 3s have done it and gone, Tesla's doing it this way for a reason. How can we do a similar system to Tesla to basically be able to use motor heat to heat the batteries or use AC cooling to cool the batteries and potentially cool the motor and all this stuff. So we're doing a very clever rad pack for the front of the Defender. Basically, it has multiple valves and it has an AC heat exchanger in there and a motor heat exchanger and all this stuff. So you can basically move all these different temperatures around throughout the system to try and keep the batteries at the optimum temperature, which means you get the most range. Try and keep the motors at the optimum temperature so you can always do crazy amount of launches. So all this sort of clever stuff, basically. And faster CCS charging speeds because you can rapidly cool the batteries to charge faster. Because currently we limit 70 kilowatt.
For the health and longevity of the battery too, let alone all of that. I mean, that's kind of one of the interesting things when I was doing the LegacyEV course. They're based in Phoenix, so they're talking about cooling the battery pack and all that stuff, which totally makes sense and is huge. But where I live in Central Oregon, like this morning, well, of course, I'm going to say in Fahrenheit, it was high 20s, which in Celsius would be like -2, I think, roughly. And then, but in the summer, it can be in mid to high 30s Celsius. I mean, it's the kind of this high.
It's the same in the UK. We've got the extreme.
Yeah.
Both ways. Same in Australia. We've got the extreme in Melbourne where we're based.
Exactly.
Over there. So it's like, how do we create a system that can do AC cooling but also do heating of the battery in one system? And that's what we've been working on with the Defender is trying to go, this is one rad pack setup that can work in Arizona or, somewhere stupidly cold. So it's one system that can basically cover both. So it doesn't matter where we're supplying the kit into. It's the same system, basically, the same setup. So it's now, and that'll also have software updates as well, which will be, as we develop that system more, we'll find certain scenarios where we can get better performance out of the batteries, better performance of the motors, as we do more and more testing and gather more and more data. So there's going to be key people we're building these kits for that we will be running like data logging on the vehicles. So continually taking data in of every vehicle over a period of time. I mean, there will be that anyway on every system for warranties and also preventative maintenance. So the big thing on the Defender kit is the most advanced system we're basically producing, and it's the latest system. And we will have data logging on there. So providing the customer is given permission, the garage or the shop that's fitted the kit will have a login, and we can basically set flags. So if we see a temperature spike or we start seeing voltage spikes and things like that, we can basically bring the vehicle into preventative maintenance. So we know if a fan is failing, or we know if a water pump's starting to fail, or we know if a battery cell was going bad, or like there's all this data we can take in, and we can basically build an algorithm to go, this car has a failing water pump. You need to bring it in and repair it before it fails on the customer. And that's something you can't do with the ICE engines.
Yeah, I mean,
now. We can self-diagnose.
Yeah,
on that, which is great.
I mean, what you're talking about is auto OEM and then some grade.
Yes.
Whereas like a lot of these EV conversion, I mean, I was excited for a drop-in battery pack for the Defender. I thought that was cool. But everything you've just said in the last 10 minutes has kind of now blown my mind as to what is possible from, well, one, driving and handling, but two, performance. Once again, I think that's really just under recognized is how important it is to kind of keep that voltage consistent and the temp to really make sure that it lasts as long as it could. And if you do that right, it can last for so much longer than just I think some of the systems we're seeing in a lot of EV conversions.
Well, even in the OEM stuff, when you look back at the
Yeah,
old Nissan Leafs and all that
yeah,
stuff,
that's
which,
exactly what I was
you
going
know,
to say too.
it's quite amazing that we, as a development of a smallish company that we are, we can develop systems that are close to OEM level because we understand software, we understand hardware, and all this stuff. We're not having to. When it came to the old ICE stuff, you'd have to have manufacturing of engines and like all these stuff. Whereas now it's all software
Right.
hardware based, which we can do with just a small, very clever group of people and implement that and get to. We're not going to get to OEM level, but we can get to a level where of reliability and
I mean,
performance, which the
a lot of the
OEMs are
stuff you're
currently
talking
doing.
about, yeah, is it's better than, like you said, the early EVs, and it's better than combustion vehicle. I mean, inherently, the fact that you can have data communication back to let you know makes it better than most combustion vehicles on the road for
We can
preventative.
also
Yeah,
flash over the data communication lines to updates, but it's not
interesting.
something we're probably going to do just because of sort of safety.
Yeah,
From sort of we don't have billions of dollars to put into safety like Tesla do when they do an over-the-air update. So we
right,
got to
right,
be
right.
careful when it comes to that. So certain things we won't allow to happen, even though we could. It's too high a risk from like a safety sort of scenario, I suppose. But yeah, so I'm really excited about that. We have got a couple of other projects we're working on. So we've been doing a lot of battery packs for marine industry recently
Oh, cool.
for companies that are producing electric outboards. So we're now producing the battery packs to go with those. And that's obviously, it's very similar to our vehicle-based batteries that we put in cars. It's just, we got to be very careful with the IP rating like we do with cars anyway. But there's a couple of other scenarios we need to be careful of to do with saltwater ingress over time because it's a little bit
Yeah,
more brutal than the normal rainwater
and yeah,
from a
salt
corrosion
water
point of view
and
and stuff.
right, right, right. Which I think is
So
awesome. I mean, that kind of expertise and uh, building knowledge only means your products are going to be that much more resilient and tougher. So that's great to hear you guys are doing that too. Uh,
And then there's another vehicle we are just about to start working on, which is more of a two-seater sports car style vehicle, which will be 180 kilowatt motor and have 40 something
oh
kilowatt
well,
hour battery pack. But it's sort of a, we're trying to see now if we can do something that's a bit more of a, you can take it on a track day, you can go and do some runs on the track, you can DC fast charge it and take it back out again. We want to see if we're at that level yet. I don't know if we are. We're going to be pushing it, but I hope we're not far off now that we can start doing some sort of retrofit vehicles for track use,
gotcha. So
to
this would
some
be a
level
drop
anyway.
in
So
for a track car sort of situation.
yeah, yeah. So there's a certain vehicle that's built in the UK. So I'm not going to say too much, but
Okay.
yeah, that's a fun track car, which most people can guess what. We'll work out what it is. But we've got the first one turning up this week, and we're going to start messing around with that, which should be great fun. It's a bit
Does
of
it
fun
start
as
with
well.
an L?
Well, it doesn't, but it can be now.
Oh,
There's
okay.
a couple
Okay.
of companies that make them, shall we say, and they're all a certain style.
Okay.
Um,
I think that
but
did
and
just
then
ring out.
alongside that, we
Yeah.
are about to start doing battery module production next year.
Cool.
So we'll start actually building modules because we've seen the change for OEMs now moving cell to pack.
Yeah.
So module production is starting to decrease. We've already started seeing it decreasing, and the availability of the
Interesting.
modules we want is starting to decrease, especially in the aftermarket. People that want to do second life, like currently a Model 3 pack is pretty difficult to use in anything other than solar storage
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's like they're 4 long modules. So we're starting to see the OEMs go that route. So we're now trying to start moving towards how do we manufacture modules to keep the aftermarket industry fed with supply of good quality modules. So that's our next. I think our next big thing is how do we start manufacturing battery modules to keep supplying ourselves mainly, but also other companies in the aftermarket as things go along with good quality modules. Which there's
That's
some
great to
clever
hear.
things we're going to do with that as well. Some clever integrations and stuff we're going to put into those modules. But I'm not going to disclose too much about that yet.
No, no, no. I totally get that. I can't remember if it says on the website, is the universal battery pack, is that an LFP chemistry, or is it kind of a nickel NCM, or can it
So
just
currently
depend?
it's an NMC,
Or yeah, NMC, sorry.
NMC currently. But when we go to module manufacturing, we will be able to offer LFP, but also something called LMFP. So CATL next year released something called
Yeah, yeah.
LMFP. So they're adding magnesium in, which there's pros and cons with it. So it only ever hits 80 degrees, so doesn't set on fire, which is great. Our universal pack, which is currently 55 kilowatt hours, with LMFP, cells will maintain around 55 kilowatt hours. So that's really good.
Right.
But alongside that, they're also releasing a new NMC cell. And then you go, oh, but the new NMC will give us 70 kilowatt hours in the same battery pack. So
Oh,
you're in
wow.
this point where you can have completely non-flammable systems, which in certain scenarios is great, like mining vehicles, boats, all that world, great.
Yeah.
But I don't know if we're quite at the point yet of reducing the size of the battery pack because of fire risk, or whether we're still at the point we need bigger battery packs. Like I don't, the point's not quite there yet. So
Interesting. Yeah.
it's at what point do we say 300-mile range is enough in a classic car, make the battery pack smaller, lighter, safer? Or is that not enough? Like we're trying to work that out ourselves at the moment is go, actually, 55 kilowatt hours in say a Porsche is 200-mile range. So we
Right.
could swap them over to LMFP. And then they're also no fire risk at all. So it's trying to work out, do we as a company take the decision to do not keep increasing our range, but increase our safety level? Like, at what point do we make that decision? Because that could be good or bad for us. Either it could be really good and then people want to buy more product from us,
Right.
but also our competition could keep doing more range, but have the fire risk. And it's trying to understand the culture in different countries to go, at what point is that trade-off? Like Tesla do it on their short range. So the Model 3 short range is an LFP, but it takes up the same amount of room as their NMC battery does with their long range. So it's showing that the transition's starting to happen because Tesla are already starting to do it. We just haven't worked out yet how to do it. But with our own module manufacturing on that same manufacturing line, we could feed in LFP batteries or NMC batteries and produce exactly the same visual module to go in exactly the same battery pack. So we can make a decision at that point then, rather than having to stock loads of each and not know.
Yeah.
We could basically chop and change depending on which customer is that pack for. What do they want? Do they want like improved safety, or do they want more range? Now, admittedly, from an improved safety point, we've never had a pack ever have an issue from a fire safety point of view, anything. So just put it out there, they are pretty damn safe. And normally the only time you get an issue is when there's an overcharge or someone's crashed it.
Right.
But there is still a risk there, obviously. So I think that's one thing we're just going to have to sound out the market over the next couple of years and work out when is that time to transition and say we're only doing like LMFP batteries that are fully non-flammable, and therefore our stuff is way safer. And at that point, you start going, well, actually, can we make battery packs out of different material? Can we change the way we package stuff? Because actually, from a safety point of view now, if you do damage it, it's non-flammable. So then other changes start happening as well from other approaches. So I think there's a lot of excitement in the industry for years to come, shall we say? And there's going to be a lot of changes. It's just when you choose to make those changes as a company from a production point of view. And I think we'll see the same thing with the OEMs as they've invested billions and billions of dollars in their production lines. Certain OEMs will not transition to a different module type for some time because they've got to get their money back. They can't afford to write those losses off. And that's the thing, is it's a juggling act very much for a lot of these OEMs of where do they commit to what cell type for now, and at what point do they cross over to a new cell type without it having a massive impact on their financials.
Yeah, and I think it has been pretty fascinating to see, and I think a lot of people weren't expecting to see how quickly I think both technologies, but also just LFP, show how resilient it can be and find ways to even make it more energy dense, that it's getting to the point that it's competitive to what NMC was just a couple of years ago, and then NMC is just really taken off even further. So I think you're totally right that I think LFP is going to probably become the main, or variants of LFP become kind of the mainstream, but still be a decent market for applications, whether that be like a motorsport or a one-off thing where having that extra kind of power, and it's still in a lot of ways safer than a combustion engine vehicle can be anyway. That I think there's really, I think it's a very exciting time, and I think the way you guys are approaching it is spot on. And you're totally right. Once you start kind of getting these non-flammable solutions, then you start the delta between weight saving starts changing again, because you also have less stuff that you have to kind of proactively build into the system.
It's very, very different.
I have to go back to the Defender kit though. I can't stop thinking about that because now I really there's a lot in there with what you said, and I'm kind of curious how much of that you plan to productize beyond just the Defender kit and be for other cars as well. Let's say being in the American market, like a classic Ford Bronco, or is that kind of the plan to make
Yeah,
it
no.
so it's
So
more
I think
productized, or
so the universal pack, for instance, should fit the Bronco as it is. And the new torque vector and gearbox with the Zonic setup, we need to sell them in volume. Like that gearbox has cost us a lot of money to develop,
yeah,
and the first batch of those gearbox are costing us a lot of money to produce. So we need to work out how we can get those gearbox into volume, because
cool.
the higher volume we can produce, the better we can do from a pricing point for the end users. So we will be looking at productizing certain components, like the seat box. We won't ever sell that separately because obviously that's tied with the Defender kit. So there's going to
Yeah,
be certain bits that we won't be selling outside of the kit. But when it comes to the motor, gearbox setup, and the universal box, obviously, potentially maybe the coolant system setup. So it might be we offer a VCU with all the valves and all the bits to do an AC cooling system, and then
gotcha.
the end user can pipe it all and do all that stuff. But we've given them all the base bits they need and the control of it, at least. Bit like we do, and we also do the same thing with our CCS kit. Like we sell a kit for CCS people to add to their current battery pack. As long as they're using an Orion BMS, they can just add it in to some level when start doing CCS rapid charging. So there's certain items we will productize definitely, just to try and help us get our volumes up, and potentially, we may work with other companies to develop kits for things like the Bronco and stuff. It's just trying to work out where's the volume in the market needed, and what are specific vehicles to choose to do large volume kits for. And at what point do we start doing a lower value vehicle in higher volume at a lower price? Like when do we? It's sort of Tesla model, isn't it? You start with the Roadster, then you move to the S and the X, then you
Right.
move to the Model 3, and then they move to the Model 2 at some point as well, just to really bring the pricing point down. We're sort of following probably a similar model in that point. Is as we get larger and larger volumes, we can potentially do lower value vehicles at a better pricing point.
Which is great.
And the features, if you look at the Model 3, it has every single feature the Model S had, and the Model S was
Right.
double the value vehicle. And so it shows that as you just do more and more with that technology, it just becomes second nature, and you just put it in everything.
Right. Um, no, I mean, all of that is so cool and great to hear. I guess one of my other questions would be, given how much you're doing with different systems for the Defender, and you're talking about you're trying to find and optimize those efficiencies, is your team kind of looking at also doing low voltage systems and kind of making that maybe more simplified and kind of a ways to update those, or to make it at least easier? Let's say I want to update my Defender and put heated seats in it, and just kind of like trying to figure out what maybe some of those optimizations are around improving the traditional low voltage systems that you could kind of put in.
We haven't yet, mainly because a lot of the Defender specialist stuff we talk to already produce new harnesses for their vehicles.
Gotcha.
So if you look at companies like Arconic and stuff that we're working closely with, they already produce every vehicle every Defender they make, they put a brand new wire harness in that they make in house, which has all those extra features in it.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Defender shops will automatically do that. So it's sort of, we need to pick our battles, I suppose.
Oh, for
And
sure,
so
for sure. And
how
that's
far do
a
we
lot
go?
of work. Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of them will be able to put heated seats in, and they will put all that stuff in to help on efficiency, and heated steering wheels and heated windscreens, and there's all those bits that they need to look at adding in to increase efficiency. But it also depends on what the customer base is as well. I think when it comes to when we get into the more higher volume, lower value vehicles, that's when you start going, actually, those vehicles need to have heated seats. They need to have a heated windscreen, because actually it's more cost effective to do that, because it benefits them on range in the winter. So there's sort of there's ploys there to take, definitely
That's
around that.
interesting. Yeah.
And there's also the ploy. I think I've got your notes in front of me. So the other thing is obviously looking at the V2G side of things, which is where it becomes even more of an asset when it comes to the classics and the conversion of sort of more regular vehicles. Because if you can do the V2G tie up, suddenly your vehicle becomes your battery pack at your house, and then you can justify having a classic electric, because also that's your $10,000-$20,000 battery pack you're going to put into your house as well. So
Right.
it sort of doubles them up. We're doing a lot of work in that area, but we're waiting for the chargers to catch up now. So there's not many companies doing V2G chargers. They just don't
Right.
seem to be a thing yet. And
Well, and
we're
here in
just
the
waiting on
US
that
too,
now.
it's a lot more difficult with just kind of our wiring infrastructure and grid. Whereas I know in kind of the UK and Europe, how most houses are wired, it's actually a lot easier to do that.
Yep.
Whereas here, it definitely usually requires like panel upgrades and a few other things. But I guess speaking of chargers and speaking of the US market, obviously a lot of the OEMs have been kind of going to the North American charging standard, or announced that they will be going towards that. Is that something your team is kind of looking at, or kind of waiting to see if there's volume to make that investment as a part of these kits you're doing?
So the North American Charging Standard runs the same communications as CCS.
Mm-hmm.
So from that point of view, in theory, our CCS system would work with a North American Charging Standard connector on it out of the box. The difference
Great.
is with the North American Charging Standard is the DC pins are also your live and neutral.
Right.
So the one thing we've got to look at now is how we produce a small inline product that can basically switch between AC DC on that input line. So it basically just when you plug into DC, it basically opens two contactors to bypass the AC charger that's on board to just go straight to the battery pack. But then when you're AC charging it, opens the contactors for the DC, it moves it across to the AC charger and doesn't allow basically the power to go to the battery pack. So we just need to work out how to do that bit sensibly, in sort of a compact manner. So we have been considering do we do an update to the universal pack and put it all inside the universal pack, and then just have the 3-pin AC coming out into the charger from the universal pack. So it just flows through and out. Is that a solution? So we're trying to work out, what's the best approach to do with that. So it's something we've been looking at. It's something we know we can do, but it's also we're also not able to get the car side connectors yet, because they haven't. All the companies we've reached out to that are going to start making them haven't started making them yet, or started making them in any volume that you can buy them. So you can buy, use Tesla ones to do testing with, but you can't go and buy a brand new car side charge port yet. Like, they're just not in production yet, but it will come. So we're aware of it. We like the idea because most vehicles have a fairly small fuel cap. So the North American Charging Standards actually allows you to fit them inside an original fuel cap without modifying the vehicle at all. So from that point of view, it's great. And if we had our way, we would just put North American Charging Standards onto every single kit, even if it's in the UK and Europe, and just supply it with an adapter plug, because it would fit in the original fuel cap place. So it would make our life a lot easier, because we just run the same across the board. And then if you need to run CCS Type 2, you just put an adapter on it. And I think that's what happened with the Model S's and the Model X's in the UK at the start.
Right.
And that stayed around for quite a long time. And I wouldn't be surprised if things go back that route.
Interesting.
Because it's more compact. It's easier to package for us. So we are openly looking at it. It's just, I think it's still going to be a year away because of just availability of product.
For sure. And I that doesn't surprise me at all, with just even the OEM saying it's at least a year away for them to get the manufacturing and that ramped up. Wow. Yeah. I am very excited to learn and see more of. Yeah, I guess as far as the Defender product, can you share pricing or a ballpark of what that might be, or how you're expecting that to kind of be priced in the US yet?
It's going to be B2B only. So I need to work out how we do the pricing. So most of the pricing will be shared with other businesses, for them to sort of take on. I mean, I got
UK
I need to
pester LegacyEV to find out the which is totally understandable.
It's not a cheap kit. Let's just put it that way.
I mean, with everything you said, that's the first I've heard of a dual transaxle, which would be so sweet, but will not be cheap.
It's more, if you want the best, we're trying to make sure we produce a system that is the best system we can possibly produce. And that's what Fellten wants to stick known for. We want to make sure we're producing the best kits on the market. And it does come up at a cost, but as we get into larger volumes, it'll actually potentially become the best systems on the market at the better price on the market, because we'll be producing more and more and more of them. So we're always trying to work out how we do cost savings and bring the costings down. So, which we're starting to see slowly as we become more vertically integrated as a company and do more and more in-house. We're starting to get more and more control over that. But I think up till now, we've been so dependent on external supply. But over the next year, with our own module manufacturing and stuff, we'll start having more and more control over our supply chain, which means we can start bringing pricing down.
Yeah, and I think it sounds like, and I'd be curious if there's any other things you're seeing, but kind of looking through the next few years, it seems like, at least for your team, uh, and maybe the larger EV market, because so many of the auto OEMs are kind of going the sell pack route, um, really growth for you will be kind of taking more and more and becoming more vertically integrated and taking a lot of this stuff in-house yourself. Do you see that kind of being the big kind of difference maker for what your team is trying to do and to really get to the scale you're looking for?
Yeah, we need to. I mean, we're bringing battery management systems in-house very soon. We've
Oh,
chosen
cool.
not to bring VCUs in-house because we work very closely with AEM and they do a very good job. So we've just stuck with them on VCUs for now.
Oh, great.
But it depends. All comes down to volume. Like the bigger and bigger you get, the more you want to bring in-house. But it's also picking your battles. I think. Like,
Yeah.
what are the big
Yeah.
quick
Yeah.
wins first? The only time we tend to bring more in-house is when we start getting issues with product. That seems to be
Interesting.
the thing. Like CCS was, who's doing a CCS kit? No one's doing a CCS kit. And then we tried a couple of different CCS kits and they just didn't work properly. So it was like, right, we're gonna have to do this in house. And we've had issues with our CCS kits, and we still find odd bugs in the system now. But we put things in place that we know we could go and do updates on those kits in the field really easily if we did find a bug, because CCS is really bloody hard.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and it's and they keep bringing new chargers out which run in a slightly
Right.
different way to the other charger because they didn't follow the standards. And then so we're continually doing testing on CCS because there's new chargers coming out, and then we've got to make tweaks to the software to work on a new charging type because they've made tweaks. So that's going to be a never-ending battle, I think, over at least the next couple of years until it really does standardize from a
Hmm.
CCS charging point of view. I think in the US it's not too bad because you've only got very specific makes of CCS charger, but the
You
UK we've
say
probably
that.
got like 15, 20 different versions of
That's
a
true.
CCS charger, and
You
it's
guys
just an
definitely
absolute pain.
have more variants and
Yes,
manufacturers over there.
that's the issue.
I
They all do something slightly differently.
Yeah. I was I mean, I rented a Model 3, but I did try a couple of just public ones that a couple of times just to try it when I did a road trip from London through Cornwall.
Yeah.
And it was still a lot of fun, and obviously the superchargers were just the easiest by far. But it was also just interesting talking to people there who had CCS vehicles, and they were definitely having some headaches, but it just didn't seem to be the same extent that we're seeing here in the US, where it's not even the it seems like the issue we run into more isn't even the communication failures. That is a thing, but it usually just the actual hardware itself is down. So I think that is finally going to change in the next year or two, but that's really what we've seen, at least. Big issues for a lot of different auto OEMs here and CCS vehicles, and I think that's obviously a big part of the reason why a bunch just said we're going to the North American charging standard. But that's a whole nother story.
I
I
mean,
just
Tesla
want
have
to
started opening up their chargers here for us to
right,
use
right,
them for
right,
other vehicles. So we have a
which kind of
handful in the
forces the
UK that we can,
competition. Yeah,
which is quite good because we can take a classic to a Tesla charger and charge up there, and we know they always work and they're really
right,
reliable. Because at the moment, you turn it to a charger and you're like, "No, is it our system that's not working, or is the charger down?" And you're in
right.
this weird thing. You go, "Are we chasing something that does not exist as a bug, and actually it's the charger that has the issue?" So it becomes quite difficult from that point of view. But hopefully it
I
will
can
continually
imagine.
improve. But this is what we're finding more recently with our customers: is it's range anxiety doesn't seem to be the thing. It's charge anxiety
For
that seems to be
sure.
the issue.
Yeah.
So the word range anxiety doesn't exist to me anymore in my head. It's not really a thing. It's if I know I can pull up to that charger and it definitely works, I have no problem. When I go out in a Tesla, it's you need to stop here for this time, here for this time. You know you're going to pull up. You know the charger is going to work, so you don't worry about the fact you're going to pull up at a charger with 10 miles left. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't bother you because you know you're going to get there and the charger's going to work. So I think that's the difference. Is all these people that don't have Teslas are, well, what if that charger doesn't work when I pull up at the service station? And I think that's the big issue we see
For
in the
sure. And
UK because there's so
it's
many
a fair
variants of charger in different states.
right. And it's a fair concern. But yeah, I think you're totally right. I was hearing those same kind of horror stories and concerns when I was over there 2 summers ago, even. And everyone I've talked to, it just seems like it is still persistent. But I really do want to say thank you so much, Chris. I know we've kind of gone over a little bit of our time. One final question that I try to ask everyone, and I think you've kind of shared some of these, but I'm just kind of curious to hear your take, especially with your part of the industry, and then your also views just in the UK and globally. But in your opinion, what are maybe innovative ways that industry or government can help accelerate the rollout of EVs and battery tech further?
I think it's a very difficult one, governmentally anyway. From a
Yeah,
political point of view, it's quite difficult. I think the big issue is that every time a different government comes in, they change it.
right,
So they need to work out a way of setting something in place that is a 10 or 20-year initiative, not something that they're going to keep changing every couple of years. Um, One thing from an EV conversion space is there doesn't seem to be a huge amount of support, if any. From a global point of view, I think a lot of the governments are so tied with the OEMs selling new vehicles that they're not really as interested in the retrofit market. They don't put a value on the environment, I think, is probably the way. So from my point of view, from it innovating ways to push the industry, I think they need to put a cost on carbon, tax on it, because I think it will make people go, I need to go green. Converting my classic car, saves this much of a carbon footprint. Therefore, it's worth me doing it from a tax incentive point of view and all this stuff. So I think there's different ways they can approach it to try and speed the industry up. But from a carbon point of view, I think it might be the better way to do it, because I had talking to someone the other day, and I think he said to me that we're not calling it global warming anymore. We're calling it a human extinction event now, because they've sort of said that it's just going too far and people aren't listening. So they need to just rejig the way it's being dealt with to make people realize that this isn't just it's global warming. This is actually
right, right, right.
a major problem that is becoming bigger quicker than everyone ever anticipated. And what is the route to resolve that? And I think the government, in my opinion, globally need to put a tax on the carbon side of things and the damage to the environment, because currently you're taxed on everything, everything's controlled, but they don't care if you're burning stuff. They don't care if
Right.
you're damaging where you're living. They care about everything else. So I think that'd be a huge change, obviously, from a global point of view, if they were actually, we are going to put a value on the emissions or your damage to the environment, and it would change so many companies' approach to things, like
Pretty much
drastically
overnight.
overnight.
Yeah.
It
No,
would be an overnight change.
I completely agree with you on that front. Actually, I mean, I've agreed with you a lot on the on today's episode, but that especially as well. So I really appreciate you sharing that and your point on that. But um, Chris, this has been really entertaining. Obviously, I'm foaming at the mouth to get to learn more about this Defender kit when it's available here in the U.S. But I just want to say thank you. And if anyone is interested in conversion, or even just follow, I think it's so entertaining just to follow your social media channels and what you're doing online. So Fellten on Instagram, Fellten, I believe it's just Fellten.com, correct? On is your main website.
Fellten.com. Yeah, and
Yeah,
then Fellten Systems is everything. Social media wise is all Fellten Systems.
gotcha. But yeah, I can't recommend what you guys are doing enough. So please, anyone listening, give it a follow. It's a great way just to learn, even if you're not looking at doing a conversion just yet, or just want to learn more about EVs and kind of the safety and a lot of the engineering that goes into it that I just don't think people are getting the exposure to or fully understanding with kind of the marketing out there for new EVs in general. So just to wrap up, thank you so much, Chris, and looking forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you very much.